And we begin tonight with the massive No Kings protests that took place all over the country and the world this weekend. Organizers say that nearly 7 million marchers turned out in big cities and small towns to protest Donald Trump and his policies. And notably, the protests were peaceful. The NYPD said over 100,000 people gathered in New York City alone without a single arrest. In San Francisco, Americans used their own bodies to spell out the message of the day: No Kings. And while Trump did his best to downplay and undermine the event, protesters were prepared to speak for themselves.
I think it's a joke.
We live by the Constitution.
I guess it was paid for by Soros and other radical left lunatics.
No one paid me to be here. My rage is free and well-deserved.
The demonstrations were very small.
There's over 2,000 of these things going on, right, across the country. Yeah. I think it's going to be bigger than 5 million.
The people were whacked out. Those are not representative of the people of our country.
I was willing to die and lost a leg in a foreign country fighting for their rights. There's no way I'm bending the only knee I have left for a king here in America.
By the way, I'm not a king.
Trump's claim that he doesn't see himself as a king may be contradicted by his actions. Over the weekend, he reposted 2 different AI-generated videos that depicted him as a king. Now, of course, the president's authoritarian ambitions go beyond AI social media. His immigration crackdown is at the heart of the protests against him, and it continues to alarm experts. ProPublica reports, quote, current and former national security officials describe the legions of masked immigration officers operating in near total anonymity on the orders of the president as an unfettered and unaccountable national police force. Trump is also claiming that he has, quote, unquestioned power under the Insurrection Act to deploy troops anywhere he wants. And his next target appears to be San Francisco, California. I should note that as a matter of law, that claim of unprecedented power is false. But just hours ago, 2 Trump-appointed judges on the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit ruled that the president can deploy the National Guard to the streets of Portland. This overturns a lower court's restraining order. All of this despite the fact that most of Trump's claims of unfettered power have actually been rebuffed by other courts, and his monarchical ambitions are being rejected by millions of Americans in the streets. Joining me now to discuss all of this and kick it off tonight is David Litt, former speechwriter for President Obama, and Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent for Vanity Fair and contributing opinion writer with the New York Times. All right, David, can we talk about this Ninth Circuit ruling? This one's unusual because usually the courts have pushed back, at least the lower courts have pushed back, and certainly on the claims of power to deploy troops to American cities for ICE enforcement, or in some cases, what looks like more federalized domestic law enforcement. What's your take on what this means, given what we saw this weekend?
Well, Melissa, first of all, thank you for having me on. And I'm also aware you know a lot more about the law than I do, but I'm going to offer a broader view, which is the Ninth Circuit used to be historically liberal. And part of what we are seeing and part of what Democrats were warning about in the last Trump term was this takeover of the courts. Right? Trump and his allies boasted about flipping the courts. This is what happens when you have these flipped, partisan-packed courts.
Well, so this is actually an opinion where 2 of the judges, the 2 in the majority, were actually Trump appointees. And there's one judge, a longtime Ninth Circuit Judge, Susan Graber, who has dissented from this ruling.
Right. And I think, I don't mean to say that every Trump judge will always support Trump. We have seen a lot of Trump-appointed judges reject the president's, as you put it, monarchical ambitions. But at the same time, I think that one of the things that Democrats, all of us worried about Trump's king-like agenda, need to be keeping our eye on is also not just what's happening now, but the continued attempt to pack the courts over the next couple of years. It's one of the reasons the Senate is going to be so important in the midterms. We have to put a stop to some of these nominations. Right,
so this Ninth Circuit ruling, Molly, is actually very interesting because it focuses on the president's claim that he needs to be able to protect an ICE facility in Portland, Oregon. We saw the protests over the weekend. We saw protests earlier in Portland. A lot of frogs. Doesn't seem to be a lot of violence. What do you make of this idea that the National Guard is needed because the protests are out of control and are basically endangering public safety.
So this is one of the problems that Trump has had this whole time, and he's had it with the No Kings protest, right? Like, you saw them nervous before it happened. You saw the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, being like, no checks, no kings. Like, if they were like, Democrats want to keep the government closed for the No Kings rally. I don't even know what that would have to do with anything. But there was like a lot of anxiety about it. And I think the fact that it ended up being 7 million people, and maybe even a little more, there's some estimations that it might be more, and that they were peaceful, and that they were not radical, and that they were people talking about just the Constitution. Like, you can't get more, that's what we're all here for. So I think that was problematic for them. And you even saw they couldn't figure out how to message it. And this White House, very good at messaging. And all of a sudden you saw Trump saying they're radicals. And then you saw someone else saying they're all old. And someone else said they were all white. I mean, okay, that none of those are disqualifying. And so I do think this has rattled them. And then you put that with those polls that show him underwater on everything. And look, even if you want to rule as a king, you still got to get a buy-in from the people.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how rattled they might have been this weekend. I know I was rattled by some of those AI videos that the president posted. I don't think I'd ever seen anything quite like that. I hope never to see anything quite like that again. But what do you make that the president first started out saying, like, this was just an anti-American demonstration, which, as Molly says, was belied by the fact that they literally transported the Constitution down the streets in some cases. And these were grandmas and veterans and everyone coming out. Why then the pivot to this AI-generated video of the president in a cockpit with a crown on doing all kinds of things?
Well, first of all, if you're hoping to never see videos like this again, I think your hopes are going to be not achieved. I'm sorry to say. They seem to be all in on this AI slop.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think part of the reason, right, they're never going to say, oops, we were wrong. That's just not how the Trump administration operates. You will see them flail. And I think this is AI flailing. And part of that is, as you're saying, this was not just peaceful, it was patriotic. I was at a No Kings protest in Red Bank, New Jersey. So it was not huge, it was in a big city. It was like a celebration of
the liberal bastion of New Jersey.
Right, I mean, and the other piece of that is, I think about this is a president who described January 6th as a day of love and tried to say that No Kings was a day of hate. And I thought it was funny because after the January 6th protest, they stormed the Capitol, and after the No Kings protest I went to, we all got Italian ice, right? It was like, this is just, if we were terrorists, we were not very terrifying. And I think that meant that the Trump administration, which would have loved some violence or something to point to, they were left with nothing. So they typed something into ChatGPT and tried to do their best.
Yeah. Not sure they succeeded in doing their best. Maybe not the best people, maybe not the best AI. But Molly, I want to play you a little bit more from many of the people who turned out this weekend. Let's take a look.
Everything this regime has been up to is anti-American.
We've got another election in just a year from now, which is the midterms. And we could actually change the House and the Senate with the midterms.
Congress makes the laws, not the president.
All right, let's think about that point. Congress makes the laws, not the president. Where is Congress right now? Do you think Congress will be bestirred after all of this to get back in the driver's seat and maybe exercise some of its prerogatives that it has thus far ceded to this president?
Congress is on vacation, right? Mike Johnson sent them home again. If you look at their calendar, it is stunning.
Yeah.
And he's keeping them out for any number of reasons. He does not want to swear in the newest member of Congress, the 151st signature on the discharge petition for the Jeffrey Epstein files, which, again, he's making that such a thing, which ultimately this administration is never going to release the files. But OK, I do think we're seeing a lot of I think they have to do popular stuff, even if they want to be autocrats. They still need some buy-in from the voters, and they're not getting that. And remember, Trump is not on the ticket again. Whatever they say, he's constitutionally not able to run again. I mean, he may try, and they may do something. But at this point, the people who are on the ticket in 2026 are on vacation. So, like, those guys, you know, even though they're trying to, like, re-gerrymander so that he doesn't lose, you know, if you re-gerrymander enough, you dummy-mander. And if there's enough of a Democratic wave, then a lot of these Republicans who think they have safe seats may not.
Right. So, David, let's talk about something Molly just said. This prospect that the president is term limited. The 22nd Amendment says he is term limited at 2 terms, but he has been floating on some of this AI-generated social media this weekend that maybe he'll stick around until the year 90,000. Like, it beggars belief. But what do you think? Is he merely floating this? Is he just being hyperbolic? Or is this a way of testing the waters?
I think Trump is always testing the waters. Right? The limiting factor in the Trump administration is what can we get away with?
Right.
And so often there's this kind of ironic way of starting out, right? It's just a joke. You know, it's tongue-in-cheek. We're all in on it. That's how, you know, not respecting the results of the 2020 election started in some ways. Trump sort of said, oh, well, if I win, and is he joking? Is he not joking? Well, we found out he wasn't joking. But maybe he found that out, too, right? He just kind of keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. I do think one of the things that struck me is even among people who I know, and also, you know, when you've seen polling on it, people who support Trump, many of them are like, a 3rd term? No, that's not how America works, right? You don't have to be like a deep lover of American civics to be like, no, 2 terms, that's the thing.
You just have to read.
Right.
In the Constitution.
It's very basic, and people are used to that. So that idea, it might be fine in again, another piece of AI content. I do think that if he ever tried it, especially if, as Molly said, he's this underwater, I don't think that he's going to find it as easy as he might think.
He's also the oldest person to ever be elected president. I'm just saying. I know
Where have we heard that before?
Right, I know we're not allowed to talk about his age because that's only for Biden, but he is actually quite old.